The cabin was steeped in half-darkness, the kind that comes after the flight attendants dim the lights so people can pretend it's night. Long-haul exhaustion floated in the air, heavy and restless. You could feel it in the way passengers shifted, against their seats, pulling blankets up to their shoulders, tugging eye masks down, or leaning awkwardly against windows that rattled softly with the engine's hum. The smell of reheated meals still lingered, a mix of overcooked chicken and instant noodles that clung to the recycled air. The overhead fans pushed it around, mingling with the scent of stale coffee, perfume, and the faint metallic tang of the airplane itself. It was the smell of nowhere, of being trapped between departure and arrival, where time didn't move the way it was supposed to. And then came the cry. It started as a small whimper, the kind of sound you might ignore, thinking the child would settle. But it grew, louder, sharper. It pierced through the low thrum of the engines, through the soft murmur of those awake, through the shallow dreams of those dozing. A baby's wail, raw, relentless, vibrating with a desperation that demanded attention. The passengers stirred. A businessman in a pressed suit trying to watch a movie pressed his fingers against his temples. A woman across the aisle muttered to her husband, "God, can't she shut that kid up?" Someone else pulled their blanket over their head. Every second the crying escalated, echoing inside the sealed cabin until it felt like it was bouncing off the walls. The mother sat in the middle seat, her body folded into exhaustion. Her eyes were red, her hair clung damply to her forehead, and her arms shook with the effort of rocking the baby. She whispered frantically, her voice hoarse, words tumbling out like prayers. "Shh, it's okay, please, please, just sleep." She bounced the child against her chest, shifted him to her shoulder, rubbed his back in small circles. Nothing worked. The baby screamed louder, tiny fists flailed in the air. His face, flushed crimson with effort, was wet with tears. Each breath came out as a jagged sob, a raw plea too young for words. The mother's eyes darted around, catching the annoyed stares, the mutters of irritation, the way people were beginning to glare at her like she was failing not just her child, but them all. A single bead of sweat rolled down her temple, catching on her jaw before dropping onto the baby's blanket. She tried to hum a lullaby, but her voice cracked, breaking under the weight of fatigue. Then, from several rows back, someone stood. It was a woman, tall enough to be noticed, but nothing about her appearance demanded attention. Her clothes were plain, almost out of place on this flight. The blouse she wore had been ironed carefully, but the fabric was thin, faded at the seams. The skirt was practical, dark, reaching past her knees. Her shoes, worn smooth from years of use, were the kind chosen for walking, not for style. And in her hands she carried nothing, not even a book or a drink, just herself. Some passengers glanced at her and then quickly away, the way people do when someone doesn't fit into their picture of where they are. A maid, that's what she looked like. An employee, a helper, a shadow in someone else's life. Out of place in the press of businessmen and families on holiday. She walked slowly down the aisle, her steps careful, respectful, almost hesitant, as if expecting someone to stop her and say, "Sit down. This isn't your business." But no one did. She moved steadily until she reached the exhausted mother in the middle seat. For a moment, she didn't speak. She simply extended her arms, palms open, a silent offering. The mother blinked, startled. Her first instinct was to pull the baby closer. But the child's cries were so loud, her own nerves so frayed, that the hesitation lasted only a breath. Something in the woman's face, calm, certain, patient, softened her resistance. She let the maid take the baby, and in that instant, the crying stopped. The baby's fists loosened. His sobs faded into hiccups, then into nothing at all. His small head nestled into the hollow of the maid's shoulder, his breath slow and steady. The entire cabin seemed to shift, as though the air had been holding its breath and finally let go. A sigh rippled through the rows. Someone chuckled in relief. The businessman dropped his hands from his temples and leaned back. The woman across the aisle muttered, "Well, thank God for that." Even the flight attendant in the back galley paused, glancing over with quiet surprise. The maid stood there, rocking the baby with an ease that looked like second nature. She didn't shush him, didn't fuss. She simply held him, swaying gently, with the rhythm of the airplane, her lips moving faintly as if humming a tune only the child could hear. The mother's chest loosened in relief. She exhaled, finally free from the weight of her baby's cries. But then her gaze lifted to the woman's face. Really lifted. The light from the overhead lamp caught her features, casting soft shadows over skin lined with quiet endurance. Her eyes were dark, steady, carrying something unspoken, something that reached across the years and grabbed hold of the mother's memory. And then it hit her. Her face went pale. Her lips parted, the relief drained away in an instant, replaced by shock so strong she nearly reached out to snatch the baby back. Her voice trembled as she whispered, barely audible, "It's you! How could it be you?" The maid froze. Her body stilled, though her arms held the baby firmly, protectively, as if she'd been holding children her entire life. Her eyes flickered, but she didn't speak. Around them, the hum of the plane was steady, the seatbelt signs glowing quietly, the night pressing against the windows. The other passengers noticed nothing beyond the miracle of a quiet baby. But for the mother, the world tilted. She stared into the face of a woman she thought she'd left behind, a woman she never expected to see again. The maid she remembered from another life, another home, another time, and the question burned in her throat, louder than the cries had been just moments ago. How could it be her? To understand why this moment stopped an entire airplane in its tracks, we need to go back years earlier to where their story truly began. The village where Amara was born barely showed up on a map. A cluster of tin-roofed homes crouched along, a dirt road half hidden behind fields that were cracked and dry for most of the year. The air always carried the smell of dust, smoke from cooking fires, and the faint sweetness of mango trees that rarely bore enough fruit for everyone to share. The nights were dark, stars spilling across the sky like a curtain, and the mornings came too early with the cries of roosters and the sound of pails clanking at the well. Amara learned responsibility before she learned play. She was the eldest of 4 children, and that meant her shoulders bore the weight of everyone else's hunger. At dawn, she rose from the mat she shared with her younger sisters, stretched her aching limbs and tied her hair back with a strip of faded cloth. While others her age might have been skipping stones or chasing kites, she walked the long road to fetch water, balancing a cracked bucket on her hip, whispering prayers that it wouldn't split before she made it home. Her mother worked her fingers to the bone in the fields, planting and harvesting, and still it was never enough. Her father, gone too soon, had left nothing but a memory of laughter and a debt no one spoke of. Survival was a daily calculation. How many cups of rice to cook, how much firewood to save, what could be sold or traded to keep the smallest children clothed. But in the quiet of the evenings, when the younger ones were finally asleep and the house was bathed in the glow of an oil lamp. Her mother would sit beside her and whisper words Amara never forgot. Remember, child, dignity isn't about money. It's about what you choose when no one is watching. We may be poor, but we are not broken. Amara carried those words like a talisman, a secret strength when the world seemed determined to grind her down. When she turned 16, the chance came. A recruiter visited the village, looking for girls willing to work in the city. Maids, nannies, helpers, whatever the families needed. The pay wasn't much, but it was more than the village could ever give. Enough to send money home, enough to buy medicine, enough to put her siblings in school. Amara didn't hesitate. Her mother cried as she packed, placing a worn satchel in her hands with a few changes of clothes and a small pouch of rice cakes for the journey. The younger children clung to her skirt, their faces wet with tears, but Amara smiled and told them she would return with gifts, with books, with stories of the city. Her mother held her close, whispering, "Go, but never forget who you are." The city struck her like a storm. The first thing she noticed was the noise, buses roaring, horns blaring, the constant murmur of thousands of lives moving at once. The second was the size. Buildings rose into the sky, glass walls catching the sun and throwing it back down so bright it stung her eyes. Streets teemed with people in clothes too fine, faces too hurried, eyes that slid right past her as if she were invisible. Her first job was in a wealthy household, a mansion with gates taller than any tree in her village, guarded by men in uniform. Inside, the floors gleamed so brightly she could see her reflection as she scrubbed them. Chandeliers sparkled overhead, cold and glittering like icicles, and the air smelled always of polished wood and perfume. She was given a small room off the kitchen, barely big enough for a bed and a trunk, but to Amara it felt like a step into another world. The rules were simple: wake before dawn, finish her chores before breakfast, never speak unless spoken. 2. She washed, she cleaned, she polished, she served. The days bled into each other, long and heavy. Her hands cracked from soap, her back ached from bending, but she never complained. She learned quickly. Move fast, keep quiet, be invisible. Yet there was one thing she could never hide. Whenever a child was placed in her arms, the atmosphere changed. The restless babies of her employers, red-faced and inconsolable, would go quiet against her chest. Their cries softened, their fists unclenched, their eyelids fluttered closed, as though her heartbeat itself sang them to sleep. The other maids noticed first. "She has a touch," they whispered in the kitchen. "The children feel safe with her." Soon the mistress of the house noticed too, watching from the grand staircase as Amara calmed her screaming infant in minutes when no one else could. There was something in her, some gift no money could buy, something old and deep as the lullabies her mother had sung to her under the village stars. Amara didn't think of it as a gift. To her, it was instinct. A child's tears were not a nuisance, but a language. Fear, hunger, loneliness, she understood them as if they were her own. Holding a baby, she remembered her siblings, the way she had soothed them through sickness, hunger, and nightmares. She knew how to sway, how to hum, how to be still in a way that told a child the world was safe. And it was this quiet gift that began to change the way her employers looked at her. No longer just the girl who scrubbed floors, she was trusted with the children. Trusted to rock them, feed them, watch over them. And in the hushed moments, in the dim nurseries where expensive wallpaper lined the walls and golden cribs gleamed, Amara felt something almost like belonging. But belonging was a fragile thing in houses that were not hers. She knew her place. She was the maid, the servant, the one who would leave without a trace if the family decided she was no longer useful. Still, she worked with a devotion that surprised even herself. Every coin she earned she sent home, each envelope carrying the hope of a better life for her sibling. Letters from her mother arrived in return, written with care on cheap paper, filled with news of school and sickness, struggles and small victories. Amara read them by candlelight, clutching the pages as if they were treasures. It was during one of these quiet evenings, as she tucked a letter under her pillow, that she first overheard a conversation drifting from the hall above. Voices raised, sharp, tense. A man's anger, a woman's fear. The words blurred together, but she caught fragments: money, debts, reputation. She froze, listening. Families like this weren't supposed to have troubles. They were supposed to be untouchable, safe in their wealth. But the cracks were there. And though she didn't yet understand what they meant, she sensed something shifting, something that would one day pull her into their storm. And at the center of it all was a girl, Clara, the daughter of the house. She was young, but already carried herself with the easy assurance of someone who had never wanted for anything. Her shoes were polished, her dresses tailored, her words sharp when she spoke to the staff. Yet beneath that polish there was something else, something restless. Clara watched Amara more than the others did, watched her with a kind of curiosity, as though trying to puzzle out how someone could live in the same house, breathe the same air, and still feel like a different species entirely. It was only a matter of time before their lives collided. Clara had grown up in a world so different. From Amara's, it might as well have been another planet. Her earliest memories were of wide, sunlit rooms with polished wooden floors, her tiny reflection staring back at her from the glossy surface. Curtains of velvet brushed against her fingertips when she played hide-and-seek, and when she tired, she collapsed into beds piled with pillows so soft they seemed to swallow her whole. Servants moved silently around her, their presence constant but almost ghostly, trained to vanish the moment she looked their way. She was never hungry, never cold, never left wanting for a toy or a book. To Clara, life was abundance, wrapped up with ribbons and promises. But that didn't mean it was easy. Her father was a man whose voice carried through walls. When he spoke, it was with authority that left no room for question. A single glance from him could silence her laughter or freeze the words in her throat. He demanded perfection from everyone around him, his business associates, his household staff, and especially his own family. Clara learned quickly that a wrong answer at the dinner table or a misplaced toy in the hallway could spark his anger. He didn't shout often, but when he did, the house itself seemed to hold its breath. Her mother was softer, gentler, but quiet in her own way. She played her part, smiling at parties, arranging flowers in vases, pouring tea with steady hands. But Clara often caught the shadows in her eyes when her father wasn't looking. It was her mother who tucked her into bed, who whispered bedtime stories, who stroked her hair when tears came after a scolding. Yet even then, Clara sensed something unspoken. Her mother lived in fear too, only she hid it behind calm smiles. Growing up in such a house left Clara with a strange mix of confidence and fragility. She carried herself like someone who belonged everywhere because she had never been told otherwise. But inside, she carried the ache of someone who longed to be seen, not as a reflection of her father's expectations, but as herself. When Amara arrived in their household, Clara was still in her early teens, old enough to understand the roles. That divided people in her world, but young enough to still wonder why they existed. She noticed the new maid immediately, though no one else seemed to. Amara's quiet presence in the background of their home intrigued her. The girl moved like a shadow, careful and efficient, eyes always lowered, never lingering where they weren't supposed to. Clara was used to staff fading in and out of her life, but something about Amara was different. The first time Clara really paid attention was during a family gathering. The house buzzed with relatives and guests, children running through hallways that smelled of perfume and roasted meat. Clara's little cousin was screaming, red-faced, twisting in the arms of an expensive nanny who looked as though she were at her breaking point. The adults tried to ignore it, talking over the wails, while Clara's aunt scolded the nanny for her incompetence. Then Amara stepped forward. Quietly, without a word, she held out her hands. The nanny looked relieved, almost desperate, as she handed the child over, and within minutes, seconds really, the crying stopped. Clara watched, wide-eyed, as her cousin melted into Amara's embrace, soothed by the gentle sway of her body, the low hum of a lullaby Clara had never heard before. The air shifted, conversations resumed, her aunt relaxed, and Amara disappeared, back into the background as though nothing had happened. Clara couldn't shake it. She approached Amara later in the kitchen, pretending to be searching for a glass of water. "How did you do that?" she asked, her voice sharper than she meant it to be. Amara looked startled, as if caught doing something forbidden. "Do what, Miss Clara?" "You know what I mean. My cousin, he wouldn't stop crying, and then you—" Clara stopped herself, frustrated she couldn't find the right words. "You made it look easy." Amara lowered her eyes, wiping her hands on a rag. "Babies only cry when they need something. You just have to listen. Sometimes they don't need to be fed or rocked. Sometimes they just need someone to hold them, like they matter." Clara didn't know what to say to that. It was too simple, too human. And yet it struck her in a place she hadn't known was tender. From that day on, Clara noticed her more, the way Amara worked quietly, with a dignity that didn't match her position, the way she seemed to carry a world of patience within her, and the way her father's sharp tone never rattled her, even when it sent shivers down Clara's spine. Clara's father, however, noticed too, but not in the same way. To him, Amara was just another servant, replaceable, unworthy of attention, except when she failed. He barked orders at her, his voice echoing down the marble halls, and she always obeyed. Yet there was something in the way she obeyed that unsettled Clara. Amara didn't shrink, didn't crumble. She absorbed it, like stone absorbs rain. One evening, Clara overheard her parents arguing behind closed doors. She had been sneaking down the hallway to steal a book from the study when the voices stopped her in her tracks. Her father's words were sharp, cutting, debts, money missing, business partners watching too closely. Her mother's voice, softer, but urgent, pleaded for calm. Clara froze, her heart racing. Their family was supposed to be untouchable. Yet here they were, speaking of ruin, and in the middle of it all, a single word caught Clara's ear. The servants. She pressed her ear to the door, breath shallow. She couldn't catch everything, but the implication was clear. Her father didn't trust the staff. He thought they were watching, listening, maybe even hiding things. It was paranoia, maybe, but the thought planted a seed. Later that night, Clara found Amara in the kitchen, folding linens. The room smelled of starch and soap, the single overhead bulb casting shadows across her face. Clara lingered in the doorway before finally blurting,
"Why don't you ever fight back?" Amara looked up, startled. "Miss?"
"When my father shouts at you, when people order you around like you're not even human. Why don't you ever say anything? You just take it." Clara's voice cracked, sharper than she meant, laced with something she didn't fully understand. Anger, jealousy, maybe even admiration. Amara folded another cloth slowly, her hand steady, because sometimes silence is the only way to protect the people you love. Clara blinked. The answer didn't make sense to her, not entirely. She wanted to push further, to demand more, but something in Amara's eyes stopped her. A sadness, a weight. Clara swallowed her questions and left the kitchen, but her mind wouldn't let it go. In the days that followed, Clara found herself watching Amara even more closely. She wondered what she meant by protecting people. She wondered what kind of life she'd lived before arriving at their doorstep. And deep down, though she would never have admitted it then, she wondered what it would be like to have someone look at her with the same patience and care Amara gave to every crying child she held. What Clara didn't know was that her curiosity was about to collide with something much darker, because in her father's world, secrets never stayed buried for long, and soon one of those secrets would reach straight into Amara's life, tearing open a wound that neither of them could ignore. The first real crack in the family's perfect glass surface came not with shouting, but with silence. Silence at the dinner table. Silence in the hallways where laughter used to echo. Clara noticed it before anyone spoke of it aloud. Her father, once the commanding figure whose voice could fill a room, had grown clipped, distracted, always somewhere else in his head. His phone calls stretched late into the night, his footsteps restless on the marble floor, pacing back and forth. Her mother moved through the house with tighter shoulders, her smiles rehearsed, her hands twisting the fabric of her dresses when she thought no one was watching. Servants exchanged glances in hushed corners, their whispers carrying a nervous edge. Clara, now old enough to understand the undertones of adult conversations, felt the weight of something pressing in on all of them. It was during this tense season that Amara became, unexpectedly, more visible. Not because she tried to be. Amara never sought attention, but because people seemed to lean on her. A cook with trembling hands after a scolding found comfort in her soft words. A younger maid, too flustered to carry out orders alone, found Amara at her side, steady and patient. Even Clara's mother, who rarely acknowledged the staff beyond polite instructions, began pausing near her, eyes lingering a moment longer, as if testing whether this quiet girl could be trusted with more than folded linens. Clara noticed. She noticed everything. And she noticed, most of all, that her father did not like it. One evening, a storm brewed outside, rain hammering the windows like desperate fists. The family gathered in the dining room, candlelight flickering in gold holders, while the servants kept the courses moving. Clara watched as her father's gaze landed on Amara, sharp and suspicious, as though her very presence irritated him. The tension grew thicker with every glance until finally his voice cut through the clinking of cutlery. "You've been here a long time, haven't you?" he asked, his words directed at Amara, though spoken like an accusation. Amara froze, a tray in her hands. "Yes, sir," she said softly. "And yet I know almost nothing about you," he continued, leaning back in his chair, eyes narrowing. "Where you come from, who your people are. Strange, isn't it? To have a stranger moving about my house?" The room stilled. Clara's mother lowered her gaze, pretending to be absorbed in her wine. Clara's own heart thundered, her fork pausing mid-air. Amara bowed her head, choosing her words carefully.
"I come from the village outside the city, sir. My family worked the land there, that is all." Her father studied her a moment longer, then snorted dismissively. The poor always say the same thing. Family, land, as if that absolves them of suspicion." He waved his hand. "Go on, get out of my sight." Amara obeyed, retreating with her tray. But Clara could see the tremor in her hands, the tightness in her shoulders. That night, Clara crept into the servants' quarters,
A forbidden act for a daughter of the house. She found Amara sitting on the edge of her narrow bed, staring at the floor. "He was cruel," Clara whispered, guilt burning in her chest. "You didn't deserve that." Amara looked up, her eyes shadowed but calm. "Cruelty is not new to
"Me, Miss Clara. It is only louder here." Clara sat beside her, lowering her voice.
Why won't you tell him more? Why won't you defend yourself?" Amara's lips pressed into a thin line. She turned her gaze away. "Because there are truths that would not make me safer. Some things are better left unsaid." The answer only deepened Clara's curiosity, but before she could ask more, footsteps echoed in the hall, and she scrambled back to her own room, heart racing. Days turned into weeks, and the tension in the house only grew. Clara's father grew more paranoid. Servants were dismissed for the smallest infractions. Locks were changed. His study, once open for her to sneak books, was now guarded like a fortress. The more he tried to control everything, the more it seemed to slip through his fingers. And then came the night Clara would never forget. She had been wandering again, restless, unable to sleep. The house was quiet, save for the storm still raging outside. Passing her father's study, she noticed the door ajar and the faint glow of a lamp. She crept closer, careful not to let the floorboards creak. Inside, her father sat hunched over. His desk, papers scattered around him like fallen leaves. His face was pale, drawn tight, sweat glistening on his forehead despite the cool air. He muttered to himself, words Clara couldn't fully catch, until a sudden thud startled her. Something heavy had fallen. It was a locked box, small, iron-bound, with her father's hand trembling as he shoved it back under the desk. And in that instant, Clara saw Amara's reflection in the glass of the window. She was there too, standing silently in the hallway, watching. Clara's breath caught. She darted back into the shadows, heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't tell if Amara had seen her, but she knew one thing for certain. Amara had seen something she shouldn't have. The next morning, the house buzzed with unusual energy. Her father's voice barked orders from dawn, servants scurrying like ants. "Find out who's been snooping," he shouted. "Someone was in the hall last night. Someone's been watching." Clara kept her head down, her stomach churning with guilt. Had he seen her? Did he know? She avoided Amara's gaze, afraid of what might pass between them if their eyes met. But that evening, Amara approached her in the garden, where Clara sat beneath the weeping willow tree, seeking refuge. The air smelled of wet earth and roses, the storm having left everything dripping and alive. Amara's steps were quiet, hesitant, until she stopped beside her. "You saw it too, didn't you?" Amara's voice was low, almost swallowed by the rustling leaves. Clara froze. "Saw what?" she whispered, though she already knew. "The box," Amara said simply. "Whatever is in it. He doesn't want anyone to know." Clara's chest tightened.
"You shouldn't talk about it. If he finds out, he already suspects me," Amara said, her eyes steady now.
And if he must suspect, then let him. I've lived with worse. Clara stared at her, struck by the calm defiance in her voice. For the first time, she wondered if Amara wasn't just enduring their world, but holding a strength that none
Of them could see. Before Clara could respond, a sharp voice pierced the garden. Her father's! Clara! He called, his tone dangerous. Inside! Now! She rose quickly, her heart hammering, but as she turned, she caught Amara's gaze.
Last time, there was something in it, something unspoken, urgent, almost protective. Clara carried it with her as she walked back toward the house, her father's shadow stretching long across the threshold. That night, lying awake in her room, Clara realized something had shifted. Amara was no longer just a quiet maid in the background of her life. She was tied somehow to the unraveling secrets of her family. And whether she wanted it or not, Clara was caught in the middle. What Clara didn't know was that this thread, once pulled, would unravel much more than her father's secrets. It would unravel everything. Nights in that house had grown different. They used to hum with a comfortable rhythm, servants cleaning up the last dishes, her mother's piano drifting down the halls, the muffled sound of her father's voice on a call. Now the air was restless, heavy. It carried an unease that Clara couldn't put into words, though she felt it in her bones. The chandelier light seemed too harsh, the silences too sharp, as if the walls themselves were waiting for something to shatter. Clara tried to keep to her routines. She rose in the mornings to the smell of butter and bread, wandered the gardens when the sun was out, read in her room when her father's mood made the rest of the house unbearable. But there was no escaping the shift. She saw it in the servants' faces, nervous glances, hushed conversations that cut off the moment she entered the room. She saw it in her mother, who lingered longer at the windows, staring out as though imagining another life. And she saw it most of all in Amara. The maid had always been quiet, but now she moved with a wariness Clara hadn't seen before. Her footsteps softer, her eyes more alert, like someone navigating a field of traps. And Clara realized something had changed since that night by the garden when they'd whispered about the box. Amara wasn't just surviving anymore, she was watching, waiting. One evening, Clara came upon her in the hallway near the study. Amara was standing still, so still it startled her. Her hand was pressed against the wooden doorframe, her body angled like she might slip inside if given the chance. Amara, Clara hissed, her voice a sharp whisper. "What are you doing?" Amara turned, her face calm but her eyes burning. "He's hiding something, Miss Clara. You know it. You've seen it." Clara felt her stomach knot. "And if he catches you? Do you know what he'll do?" "Yes," Amara said simply. "But secrets don't stay buried. Sooner or later they destroy the house that hides them." The words lodged themselves in Clara's chest. She wanted to tell Amara to stop, to walk away, to keep her head down, but she couldn't. Because the truth was, Clara wanted to know too. She wanted to know what was inside that locked box, what poison had seeped into their family's life. The chance came sooner than either of them expected. Her father left on business, a sudden trip announced in a fury of slammed doors and shouted instructions. The house exhaled when he was gone, servants moving more freely, her mother daring to laugh lightly at dinner as though reclaiming some small sliver of peace. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. The storm had returned, beating against her window, and her mind spun circles around the memory of the box. She rose quietly, slipped on a robe, and crept through the hallways. Every shadow seemed alive. Every gust of wind rattling the panes felt like a warning. She reached the study. The door was locked, but Clara had stolen the small brass key weeks ago, swiping it from her father's desk drawer when he wasn't looking. Her hands trembled as she slid it into the lock. The door creaked open. The smell of leather and smoke enveloped her, her father's presence lingering even in his absence. The desk loomed in the center of the room, papers stacked, ink pens scattered, a half-empty glass of whiskey staining a coaster. And beneath the desk, exactly where she remembered, was the iron-bound box. She knelt, pulling it toward her, the weight of it surprising her. Her fingers fumbled at the lock. Of course, it wasn't just a box. It was sealed with a small padlock, one she had no key for. Her heart pounded, frustration and fear clawing at her. "Miss Clara." The voice made her gasp. She spun, her robe nearly tangling around her feet. Amara stood in the doorway, candle in hand, the flame trembling. "Yeah."
"Scared me," Clara whispered harshly. "What are you doing here?" Amara stepped forward, her eyes fixed on the box.
"The same thing you are." Clara stared at her, the candlelight painting shadows across Amara's face. "We can't. If he finds out..." Amara's expression didn't change. "He'll find out anyway. Secrets like this don't stay quiet. Better we learn the truth before it swallows us whole." Clara wanted to argue, to tell her to leave, to protect her from her father's wrath. But Amara was already kneeling beside her, pulling a small pin from her apron pocket. Clara watched in shock as she slid it into the lock, her hands steady. "You know how to pick a lock?" Clara whispered, disbelief laced with awe. Amara's lips twitched in something almost like a smile. "Life teaches you many things when you don't have keys handed to you." There was a soft click. The padlock fell open. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. The rain pounded harder, thunder growling above, as though the world itself knew what they were about to uncover. Clara's hands shook as she lifted the lid. Inside, at first glance, was only paper. Neatly folded letters, documents bound with
twine, envelopes thick with age. Clara reached for one, her fingers brushing against the brittle edge.
She unfolded it and scanned the words, her eyes widening. Numbers, accounts, names she didn't recognize, money, vast amounts of it, shifting through places she'd only heard mentioned in passing, and, tucked among them, letters written in her father's handwriting, filled with promises and threats to people she had never met. "What is this?" Clara whispered, her voice shaking. Amara leaned closer, her face unreadable. "It's proof," she said softly. "Proof that your father
has enemies.
Proof that he's hiding something that could ruin him." Clara dropped the paper back into the box, her stomach lurching. "We shouldn't have seen this. We shouldn't even be here." But Amara didn't look afraid. She looked resolved. "Now, you understand? The man who shouts and controls and pretends he holds everything together. He's building his world on lies, and lies always collapse." Before Clara could answer, a sudden sound froze them both. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, echoing down the hall. Her father wasn't supposed to be home. Clara's blood ran cold. She slammed the lid shut, Amara snapping the lock back into place just as the footsteps drew closer. The key still glinted in Clara's hand, her breath caught in her throat. The study door rattled. "Clara?" Her father's voice, low and dangerous, seeped through the wood. "What are you doing in there?" Clara's body stiffened, fear gripping her chest like a fist. Amara reached out, her hand covering Clara's for a brief, steadying moment. The touch was firm, grounding, as though telling her, whatever comes next, you're not alone. But the door handle began to turn, and they both knew there would be no time to hide. The door swung open before Clara could even form an excuse. The heavy wood banged against the wall, the candlelight flickering violently as her father filled the doorway. His figure was massive in that moment, broad shoulders, dark eyes glinting beneath furrowed brows, the smell of whiskey rolling off.
Him. For a heartbeat, silence pressed down on the room, so heavy Clara thought it might crush her. She clutched the candle tighter, her breath caught in her chest.
Amara was already rising to her feet, her face calm, but her posture tense, as if bracing for a blow. "What?" her father's voice rumbled, low and dangerous. "Are you doing in here?" Clara scrambled for words, heat rising in her face. I couldn't sleep," she stammered. "I just wanted a book." Her father's eyes flicked to the desk, then to the box still tucked beneath it, lock fastened once more. His jaw tightened. "At this hour, with the maid at your side," Aura's throat went dry. She could feel his suspicion wrapping around them, choking the air. Amara stepped forward slightly, her voice steady. "I was only checking on Miss Clara, sir. I found her here." She looked frightened. The lies slid from Amara's lips as smooth
as water. Clara turned her head, stunned at the boldness of it. Her father's gaze bore into Amara, searching her face for cracks.
For a long moment the storm outside was the only sound, the rain lashing the windows, thunder rumbling like a warning drum. Finally, he growled, "Get out." His eyes didn't leave Amara. "Both of you?" Clara didn't hesitate. She hurried past him, the hem of her robe brushing the floor, her heart pounding so loud she was sure he could hear it. Amara followed, her candlelight casting wavering shadows on the walls. But just before the door shut behind them, Clara risked a glance back. Her father was crouched by the desk, pulling the box out into the open. His hands lingered on it, possessive, like a man holding his last defense. The sight of it made her shiver. Back in her room, Clara collapsed onto her bed, her chest heaving. "He knows," she whispered into the darkness. "He knows we saw something." Amara blew out the candle, plunging the room into shadows. "Not yet," she murmured. "But he suspects. That's enough." Clara sat up, gripping the blanket. "Why did you lie for me? Why take the risk?" Amara's silhouette stood by the window, framed by the storm outside. "Because I've lived under men like him before. And I know that once suspicion starts, it only grows. If it falls on me, I can bear it. But you," she paused, "you're his daughter, his blood. You must be protected, even from him." The words unsettled Clara. She had always assumed her position as his child shielded her. But hearing Amara speak it aloud, that even family wasn't safe from his suspicion, set a new kind of fear deep in her chest. The next morning, the house shifted. Doors closed faster, voices dropped to whispers, and Clara's father prowled, the halls like a predator searching for prey. He questioned the staff relentlessly, his tone sharp, his patience non-existent. Some cried, others stammered, but Amara remained stone. Clara watched her during those interrogations. Amara's answers were calm, respectful, but never grovelling. Her father's questions dripped with accusation. "Who told you to be near my study? What were you doing awake at that hour? Who have you been speaking to?" And each time Amara replied, with quiet steadiness, refusing to give him the satisfaction of fear. Her father hated it. Clara could see it in the way his jaw clenched tighter, his fists curled harder. He was a man who thrived on control, and Amara's composure chipped at that control in ways he couldn't admit. But the danger grew sharper when a letter arrived. Clara saw it by accident, passed discreetly into her father's hand by a messenger who left as quickly as he came. She caught only a glimpse of the seal, unfamiliar and foreign. That night, through the crack in her bedroom door, she heard his voice rising, furious, threatening the very air. "They think they can expose me," he hissed. "They think they can undo everything I've built," her mother's voice answered, trembling but firm. "Then stop building lies before it's too late." There was a slap. The sound froze Clara's blood. She clapped a hand over her mouth, swallowing a sob as silence followed. Then her mother's footsteps, soft and broken, retreating down the hall. The next morning, Clara found her mother's teacup still trembling in her hands. She wouldn't meet Clara's eyes. It was Amara who spoke. "The truth is closing in," she whispered, when they were alone in the laundry room, the scent of soap and damp cloth clinging to the air. "Soon it won't matter if the box is locked or hidden, it will find its way."
"Out!" Clara's voice cracked. "What will happen to us?" Amara met her gaze, her eyes dark but certain. "That depends on whether we're brave enough to face it."
For days, Clara carried those words like a stone in her pocket, heavy and impossible to ignore. She wanted to believe she could be brave, but bravery in her father's house was like striking a match in a storm. It flared, then vanished under the weight of the wind. The storm finally broke one evening at dinner. The family sat in brittle silence, servants moving around them like nervous ghosts. Her father's gaze was sharp, cutting from one face to the next, searching. And then, without
warning, he slammed his fist on the table, rattling the silverware. "Someone has been meddling where they don't belong," he barked.
"Someone has been prying into matters that will destroy this family if they're not stopped." No one breathed. The only sound was the slow drip of wine from an overturned glass. His eyes landed on Amara. "You!" he spat, pointing a finger. "You think I don't see you? Always watching, always lingering. You dare to put your nose where it doesn't belong." Amara didn't flinch. She stood perfectly still, her face calm, her hands folded neatly in front of her apron. "I serve this house, sir, nothing more." But Clara could see it, the spark of defiance in her eyes, small but unyielding. Her father rose, towering over her. "You will remember your place," he thundered, "and if I find you near my study again, you will be thrown out with nothing. Do you understand?" Amara's voice was soft, but it carried through the silence. "I understand, sir." Clara's chest burned. She wanted to speak, to defend Amara, to shout that her father was wrong, but fear glued her lips shut. Her fork clattered to the plate, her hands trembling, but no words came. That night, long after the house had gone quiet, Clara found Amara again. She was in the servants' courtyard, sitting alone beneath the pale moonlight. Her face was unreadable, her shoulders straight, despite the weight pressing down on her. "I should have said something," Clara whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "I should have defended you." Amara turned, her gaze gentle. "No, if you
had, he would only punish you too. Sometimes silence is the only shield we have." "But it isn't fair," Clara choked. Amara's hand brushed hers, a fleeting touch, but it steadied her. "Life isn't fair, Miss Clara, but one day, truth finds its way, always."
Clara believed her. Or at least she wanted to. But as the moon drifted higher and the shadows deepened, She couldn't shake the feeling that the truth, when it finally came, would cost them both more than they could bear. The house no longer felt like home to Clara. It felt like a stage, and everyone was trapped, performing a part they didn't choose. Her father played the tyrant, stalking the halls with suspicion carved into every line of his face. Her mother played the dutiful wife, though the quiet bruises blooming on her skin betrayed the cracks in her role. The servants played their parts, as shadows vanishing quickly, speaking softly, bowing lower than ever. And Clara? Clara had become the daughter who smiled when told to smile, nodded when spoken to, and kept her secrets pressed tight against her ribs. But the hardest part was watching Amara. Amara, who had always carried herself with quiet strength, was now under a sharper lens. Her father's eyes followed her like a hawk's, watching every step, every word, every gesture. Clara noticed the way the other servants pulled away from her, not out of dislike, but fear of association. They knew that to stand near Amara was to risk catching her father's wrath. And yet Amara bore it all with the same calm she always had. She carried trays, folded linens, soothed crying children of guests, all without complaint. But Clara saw the truth beneath the calm. She saw it in the way Amara's hands lingered too long on the edges of the desk when she cleaned, as though testing the weight of the locked box hidden there. She saw it in the way her eyes sometimes flicked toward Clara, searching, questioning, as if to say, "Will you stand with me when the time comes?" The time came sooner than either of them wanted. It was a night that began like any other. The family gathered in the dining room, the air thick with tension. Her father had been drinking more heavily, his words sharp and slurred at the edges. Clara kept her eyes on her plate, her fork dragging across untouched food. Her mother sat with lips pressed thin, her silence screaming louder than any argument. Amara moved about the room with steady grace, refilling glasses, clearing dishes. And then it happened. Her father dropped his glass, the crystal shattering across the marble floor. Wine bled like blood into the cracks, seeping into the rugs. He stood abruptly, his chair screeching against the floor. "Enough," he barked. "Enough of this charade." His eyes cut through the room like knives. "I know someone has been prying. I know someone has touched what does not belong to them." Amara froze, her pulse hammering in her ears. Her father's gaze landed squarely on Amara. "It's you," he snarled. "You think I don't see you creeping around my study? You think I don't know your kind, waiting like rats for scraps, sticking your nose where it doesn't belong?" The room was silent. The servants had frozen mid-step, their faces pale. Clara's mother reached for her husband's sleeve, her voice trembling. "Please, not in front of everyone." "Silence!" he roared, yanking his arm away. His eyes never left Amara. "Tell me, girl, what have you seen? What have you told?" Amara stood perfectly still. She didn't bow, didn't cower, didn't tremble. Her voice, when it came, was soft but steady. "I have seen nothing but what this house shows, sir, and I have told nothing that is not true." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Clara's breath caught. She wanted to leap to her feet, to shield Amara, to shout that it wasn't her fault. But fear nailed her to her chair, her body trembling while her father's rage grew hotter. "You..."
"Dare!" he hissed, stepping closer, the veins in his neck straining.
"You dare stand there and speak to me as though you are equal? You are nothing, nothing!" His hand raised, and Clara flinched, sure he would strike Amara. But Amara didn't flinch. She looked him straight in the eye, her face calm, her chin lifted ever so slightly. "If I am nothing," she said quietly, "then you should not fear me." A gasp rippled through the room. Even Clara's mother's hand flew to her mouth. The servants stared, eyes wide, waiting for the explosion. Her father's face turned red, his fury nearly choking him. But for a moment, just a moment, he faltered. Amara's words had cut deeper than any scream could. He stumbled back, his chest heaving, his mouth working for words that wouldn't come. And in that fragile pause, Clara felt something ignite inside her. She pushed her chair back, the sound startling in the silence. "She hasn't done anything," she blurted, her voice shaking, but growing stronger with each word. "If you want someone to blame, blame me. I was in the study. I took the key."
"I wanted to know what you were hiding." The room spun with her confession. Her mother gasped, the servants froze, Amara's eyes widened in shock.
Her father's gaze snapped to her, his fury redirected like lightning seeking a new target. "You?" His voice dripped with disbelief, then hardened into rage. "You dare defy me in my own house?" Clara's knees shook, but she forced herself to stand taller. "Yes," she whispered, "because I'm tired of living in shadows."
"I'm tired of your secrets choking us all." Her father's hand struck the table, rattling dishes. "You foolish girl, do you have any idea what you've done, what you've put at risk?" Clara swallowed hard, her voice breaking but unyielding.
At least I was brave enough to look. For a moment no one breathed. The storm outside rattled the windows, thunder shaking the walls. Her father's fury was a tangible force, but something else had cracked too. His control, his perfect facade. And Clara knew in that moment that nothing in their lives would ever be the same again. Her father's lips curled into something between a snarl and a smile.
"If you want the truth so badly," he spat, "then you'll have it. But don't say I didn't warn you when it destroys you too." He stormed from the room, his footsteps echoing through the halls, the sound of a man preparing for war.
The servants scattered, her mother collapsed into her chair, and Clara stood trembling, her confession still burning in the air. Amara moved to her side, her hand steady on Clara's arm. "You were brave," she murmured. "Braver than you know." But Clara's stomach twisted, her heart pounding with dread. She had torn open the first seam, and now the whole fabric of her world was about to unravel. Because her father would not let this go. And the box, with all its secrets, was no longer safe. The house was restless that night, as though it too had overheard Clara's words at the dining table and was holding its breath. The servants moved in silence, their steps muffled, their eyes averted. Even the air felt heavier, thicker, carrying a tension that pressed against the walls until they seemed ready to burst. Clara could not sleep. She lay in bed with her pulse hammering in her ears, every creak of the floorboards outside making her flinch. Her father had stormed from the dining room hours earlier, but his absence was no relief. It was worse. She could feel him prowling, somewhere in the house, planning, waiting, deciding how to strike. She rose finally, pulling her shawl tight, and crept into the hallway. The storm outside was fading, the rain thinning to a whisper against the glass. But inside, the storm raged on. At the far end of the hall, she saw the faint glow of candlelight, leaking beneath the door of the study. Her heart thudded. He was in there. With the box. Clara froze, caught between dread and compulsion. Part of her wanted to run back to her room, bury herself under the covers, pretend none of this was happening. But another part, a louder, stronger part, knew she couldn't. Not after what she'd confessed, not after what Amara had risked. She padded quietly down the hall, each step deliberate, her breath shallow. She reached the door and pressed her ear against the wood. At first there was only silence, and then she heard it. The scrape of metal, the low rustle of papers, her father's muttering voice. The box. Clara's hand trembled on the doorknob, but before she could turn it, a soft whisper cut through the dark. Miss Clara. She spun, stifling a gasp. Amara was there, emerging from the shadows like a ghost, her candle shielded in her palm. Her face was calm, but her eyes burned with urgency. "You shouldn't be here," Clara whispered, though the words felt weak even as she said them. "Neither should you," Amara replied, her tone even. "But we can't leave him alone with it." "Not now." Clara's throat tightened. "If he catches us—" "He will destroy it," Amara cut in, her voice low but firm. "He will burn the letters, erase the proof, bury everything, and then we will never know. Whatever has poisoned this house, it will remain hidden and it will consume us all." Clara hesitated, torn between terror and the desperate pull of truth. She looked into Amara's eyes and saw no fear, only resolve. It steadied her. "Then we can't waste time," Clara breathed. Together they eased the door open just enough to see inside. Her father was hunched over the desk, the iron-bound box open before him. Papers spilled across the surface, ledgers, contracts, letters written in his slanted hand. His jaw was clenched, his face grim as he read, the candlelight flickering across his features. Every so often he growled under his breath, shoving a page aside, pulling another free. Clara's breath caught. He was sorting them, separating some, into a pile, feeding others into the fire roaring in the hearth. Already ash fluttered upward, devouring secrets that could never be retrieved. She swayed against the doorframe, panic clawing at her chest. "He's destroying it," she whispered. Amara's hand brushed hers, grounding her. "Not all of it."
"Not yet." They stood frozen, watching as he fed more pages into the flames. The paper curled and blackened, words vanishing in bursts of smoke.
And then he stopped, his hand resting on a particular letter, his eyes narrowing as he read. Clara couldn't see the words, but she saw the way his lips tightened, the way his hand trembled just slightly before he crumpled the paper and clenched it in his fist. He didn't burn it, he tucked it into his coat pocket instead. "Important," Amara breathed. "Whatever that was, it's what he fears most." Clara's head spun. She wanted to burst into the room, demand answers, seize. The paper before it vanished forever, but fear anchored her feet to the floor. Her father was a storm, and to step into his path now would be to invite destruction. The door creaked under her weight, just barely, but it was enough. Her father's head snapped up. "Who's there?" Clara froze, her heart leaping to her throat. Amara grabbed her hand, pulling her back, but the door was already swinging wider, candlelight spilling into the hall. Her father's silhouette loomed in the doorway, the fire at his back, the box still open on the desk. His eyes locked on Clara first, then shifted to Amara. His face darkened like thunderclouds gathering. "So it was the both of you," he said, his voice low, dangerous. "Spying, whispering, plotting against your own blood." Clara shook her
Head, words spilling out in a rush. "No, father, I wasn't—" "Don't lie to me," he snapped, stepping forward.
"You confessed at dinner, and now you dare stand at my door in the dead of night with this—" He spat the word like venom. "Servant at your side." Amara straightened, her voice calm but firm. "We only wanted the truth." Her father's
eyes flared with fury. "The truth?" He laughed bitterly, a sound sharp enough to cut glass.
The truth would crush you, girl. It would tear you apart. You know nothing of the world I protect you from. Protect? Clara's voice broke as it rose. You call this protection? Locking us in fear, hiding secrets, burning them like—
Sins you can erase? Her father's face twisted, veins standing out in his neck. Enough! You will not speak to me this way. You will not question me. He jabbed a finger at Amara, his voice thundering. And you, your place is at the foot of this table, on your knees, silent, grateful for scraps. Do not dare forget.
It. Amara didn't flinch. Her gaze was steady, her chin lifted, her voice quiet but unyielding. I have not forgotten my place, sir, but perhaps it is you who has forgotten yours. The silence after those words was a blade. Clara felt it slice through the air, saw her father's fury ignite like oil on flame. His hand twitched, his whole body taut with violence waiting to be unleashed. Clara stepped forward, her voice trembling, but desperate. Please, father, stop. Don't— But he was already moving, striding back to the desk. He snatched up the rest of the papers, shoving them into the fire, his face a mask of rage. The flames roared higher, devouring page after page, smoke billowing up the chimney. No! Clara cried, rushing forward, but Amara's hand caught her arm, pulling her back. The heat from the fire blasted across the room, the words vanishing.
In smoke. Her father turned back to them, his eyes blazing, his voice low and final.
There will be no more questions, no more prying. If I have to break this house apart to silence you, I will. Clara's chest heaved, her eyes burning with tears. Amara's grip tightened on her arm, her calm the only anchor in the storm. But Clara knew, as she stared at the last unburned paper bulging in her father's pocket, that the battle was far from over. Because whatever he had saved was the key, and somehow, some way they had to get it before it destroyed them all. The house did not sleep after that night. Its silence was no longer peace but suffocation, every corner thick with what had been lost in the flames and what still smouldered in her father's pocket. Clara's mind refused rest. She lay awake until dawn, eyes burning, replaying the fire again and again, pages curling into ash, ink disappearing into smoke, her father's hand closing over that one folded letter before sliding it into his coat. That letter haunted her more than the fire. What made it different? Why save it when the others went to their graves in smoke? Clara knew with a bone-deep certainty that whatever truth her father had locked away in that scrap of paper was the root of everything, the rage, the fear, the shadows that had poisoned their home. By morning, she had resolved one thing. She
had to see it. But resolve did not make courage any easier to hold.
At breakfast, her father sat silent at the head of the table, his coat draped neatly over the chair beside him, the bulge of the hidden letter plain if one knew where to look. His face was calm, almost gentle, but Clara knew better. It was the quiet of a wolf crouching low, waiting for the right moment to lunge. Her mother stirred sugar into her tea with trembling hands, her spoon clinking far too loud. The servants barely breathed as they moved around the room, their eyes fixed on the floor. And Amara's presence was steady, quiet as always, but when Clara dared glance at her, she saw the truth burning behind her calm. I saw it too. I know it too. We cannot leave it there. Clara's fork scraped against her plate, her appetite gone. The thought of reaching across the table, snatching that coat, made her palms sweat. But she could feel Amara's gaze brushing against her, as if whispering across the distance, "Not now, Not here, but soon. The day passed in a blur of dread. Her father locked himself away in the study again, the door shut tight, the sound of his pacing footsteps carrying through the wood. Clara tried to read, to sew, to lose herself in anything, but her mind kept circling back. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that coat pocket. By evening, Clara found herself drawn toward the kitchen, where the warm smell of bread and herbs curled in the air. Amara stood at the table kneading dough, her sleeves rolled to her elbows, her movements steady
and purposeful.
Clara lingered in the doorway, the weight of her fear heavy in her chest. "You're not supposed to be here," Amara said without turning, her voice soft but certain. Clara stepped inside, her bare feet whispering against the stone. "Neither."
"Are you?" Amara's hands stilled on the dough, then resumed kneading. "I know what you're thinking." Clara's throat tightened. "And?" Amara lifted her gaze finally, her dark eyes steady. "It's dangerous, too dangerous, but if we don't, we'll never know, and he'll keep holding that letter like a knife over your head, over all of us." Clara's voice wavered. "I don't know if I can. He'll kill me if he finds out." Amara
wiped her hands on her apron, then moved closer, her presence a quiet strength. "You won't do it alone." Clara's chest ached, her breath shallow. No one had ever stood with her like this before. Not her mother, who had long ago folded into silence. Not the servants, who avoided her eyes. Only Amara, steady as stone, unflinching even in the face of her father's wrath. "How?" Clara whispered. Amara's eyes didn't leave hers. "He keeps the coat in his wardrobe at night. When he sleeps heavily, especially after drink. That will be our chance." Clara's stomach turned. Sneaking into her father's room felt like stepping into a lion's den. She could still hear the echo of his voice, the threat laced in every word. But she also remembered the fire, the pages turning to ash, the secrets. Devoured by smoke, that letter was the last piece left. "Tonight," Clara said, her voice barely audible. Amara nodded once. The hours crawled toward darkness, each tick of the clock stretching her nerves taut. Clara paced her room until the floorboards groaned underfoot, her hands damp, her heart refusing rest. She thought of her father's footsteps outside her door, of his fury when he found her in the study, of the way his hand had hovered as though he might strike Amara. Fear threatened to choke her. But when the house finally stilled, when the lamps were dimmed and the halls sank into shadow, she found Amara waiting at her door. Candlelight traced the lines of her face, soft but resolute. Clara felt her knees weaken at the sight. Together, they moved like shadows down the hall. Every creak of the floor seemed deafening, every whisper of fabric a shout. At her father's door, Clara nearly faltered, her body trembling, but Amara's hand brushed hers, warm and steady, anchoring her. The door gave a soft groan as it opened. The room was dark, only the faint glow of embers in the hearth casting red light across the floor. Her father's heavy breathing filled the silence, steady, deep, the sound of a man sunk deep in drink and exhaustion. Clara's chest seized with fear. The wardrobe loomed against the wall, its dark wood glinting faintly. The coat was inside. The letter was inside. Amara slipped in first, her movements silent, her steps deliberate. Clara followed, her breath shallow, every muscle in her body taut as a bowstring. They crossed the floor slowly, the sound of her father's snores rattling. Her bones Amara reached the wardrobe and eased it open. The hinges gave the faintest whine, making Clara's stomach twist. Inside hung his coats, heavy and neat. Amara's hand moved with precision, finding the one he had worn at dinner, the one with the letter tucked inside. Her fingers slid into the pocket, and then her father stirred. Clara froze, her blood turning to ice. His breathing hitched, his body shifting slightly on the bed. Amara's hand stilled, her eyes flicking to Clara's in the dark. A silent command passed between them. "Don't move. Don't breathe." The silence stretched long enough to break them, both. And then, mercifully, his breathing steadied again, deeper this time. Amara's fingers closed around the folded paper. She drew it out slowly, carefully, her movements fluid as water. Clara's chest ached with the need to breathe, her heart pounding so loud she feared it would wake him. The letter slipped free. They backed away inch by inch, the coat swaying slightly on its hanger, the air thick with the threat of discovery. Clara's feet whispered across the floor, her pulse a roar in her ears. The doorframe was only steps away when her father stirred again, this time with a groan, his arm flinging out, his body rolling onto his back. His face turned toward them. The girls froze in the half-light, the letter clutched in Amara's hand. His eyes fluttered open. Her father's eyes flickered open, bleary at first, then sharp as they adjusted to the dim light. Clara's chest seized, her breath caught in her throat. For a heartbeat, she thought maybe, just maybe, he would sink back into sleep, dismiss their silhouettes as a dream. But his gaze locked on them, and the silence shattered. "What?" he rasped, his voice a growl rising from the pit of his chest. "Are you doing in my room?" The letter trembled in Amara's hand, the pale edge glinting in the ember light. Clara could feel the air thicken, heavy with danger, every second stretching into eternity. Her father sat up, his shadow stretching across the wall. The weight of his fury filled the room like a storm pressing against the windows. "Give it to me." His voice was cold, deliberate, the voice of a man who could break worlds with the flick of his hand. Clara's knees shook, her mouth dry, but she forced
her voice to rise.
"No." The word startled even her, thin and trembling though it was. Her father's head snapped toward her, his eyes blazing. "What did you say?" "No," she said again, stronger this time. "You can't hide it from us anymore. We saw the fire. We saw you burn everything else, but you kept this one. Why? What's in it that you fear so much?" Amara stepped closer to Clara, the letter clutched tight. Her voice was steady, calm, though Clara could hear the heartbeat beneath it. "If it's nothing, then let us read it. If it's everything, then you can't destroy it. The truth will live whether you want it or not." Her father swung his legs off the bed and stood, looming, his nightshirt loose, his fists clenched. He looked less like a man than a force of nature, coiled with rage. "You think you can lecture me, you, a child, and you—" His glare cut into Amara like a blade. "A servant who forgets her place." Clara stepped in front of Amara, her own body shaking but refusing to move aside. "She's braver than you'll ever be. She's the only one who's ever told the truth in this house, and I won't let you silence her." For a moment, the room pulsed with silence. Then, with a sudden snarl, he lunged. His hand shot out, seizing Clara's wrist, his grip iron crushing. She gasped, pain flashing up her arm, but Amara didn't falter. In that instant, she tore open the letter. The sound of paper ripping was like a gunshot in the room. "No," her father roared, his face twisting with fury. He released Clara, lunging for the torn sheet, but Amara had already lifted it to the candle flame. "Stop," she said, her voice firm, her hand steady despite the tremble in the flame. "Or I will burn this, and then you'll lose it forever. Let us read it, or it's gone." Her father froze, panting, rage vibrating through him. Clara could see the war in his eyes, the instinct to destroy clashing with the desperation to protect what was written. At last he snarled, "Read it then, but don't think you'll understand." Amara lowered the paper, smoothing its creases, and began to read aloud. Her voice was low, deliberate, each word cutting through the air like a bell. The letter wasn't a ledger or a contract or a threat. It was a confession, a story scrawled in her father's hand, meant for no one, never to be read. It spoke of a girl, young and vulnerable, cast out by circumstance and left in desperation. It told of promises made to her in secret, promises her father had never intended to keep, of a child born in the shadow of his wealth, hidden away, unacknowledged, a daughter he had abandoned, discarded like an unwanted burden. The name written there made Clara's breath catch. Amara. The paper trembled in her hands. Her father's secret was no longer smoke or suspicion. It was flesh and blood, standing in this very room. Clara's mind reeled, the walls of her world crumbling around.
Her.
Amara wasn't just a maid, she was family. Her half-sister, the blood her father had tried to bury. Amara's eyes flicked up from the paper, and for the first time Clara saw them not as steady or calm, but broken, filled with the weight of a
truth she had always suspected but never dared name. "You left us," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You left my mother with nothing."
"You left me to serve in your house as if I were dirt beneath your feet. And all this time you knew." Her father's face was stone, his jaw tight, his fists trembling at his sides. "You were a mistake," he hissed. "A weakness I refused to claim. That's all you ever were." The words hung in the air like poison. Clara felt them sink into her skin, her heart breaking, not just for herself, but for Amara, who had carried this shadow her entire life. "You're wrong," Clara said, her voice shaking with fury. "She's not a mistake. She's the only good thing left in this house. She's more family to me than you'll ever be." Amara's hand tightened on the paper, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. For once, she let the mask slip, her pain laid bare. But behind it was something stronger, resolve. "I don't need your name," she said, her voice steady again, steel beneath the softness. "I don't need your wealth. But I will never let you make me small again. Not me, not Clara, not anyone. Her." Father lunged again, but this time Clara was ready. She stepped into his path, shoving him back with all the strength she had. He stumbled, rage blazing in his eyes, but something had shifted. His control, once absolute, was gone. The truth had cracked it, and nothing he could do would bind it back together. "Leave," Clara said, her voice trembling but firm. "Leave this house, or we will. Either way, you don't own us anymore." The words tasted like freedom, sharp and unfamiliar, but real. Her father's face contorted, caught between fury and defeat. He reached for the letter, but Amara tore it in half before his eyes, the pieces fluttering to the floor. He stared at them, his secrets in ruins, his silence louder than any outburst, and then he turned and stormed out, his footsteps shaking the walls, but this time Clara felt no fear, only release. The house was quiet again, but not suffocating. The silence was theirs now, not his. Clara turned to Amara, tears streaking her face, her chest heaving with relief. "I'm sorry," she whispered.
"I didn't know. I didn't see." Amara shook her head, her eyes soft, her hand reaching to clasp Clara's. "You saw enough. You stood with me when no one else would. That's more than I ever hoped for." They stood together in the glow
Of the dying fire, no longer mistress and maid, but sisters bound by something stronger than blood, truth. Years later, on that airplane, when the child's cry split the cabin and the mother's panic turned the air electric, Clara had recognized Amara's touch before her eyes had even lifted. The same steady hands, the same calm voice soothing. The baby, the same courage that had once steadied Clara in the shadow of their father's wrath. The recognition had undone her, tears burning behind her eyes, not just because Amara had saved the child, but because she had always been the one saving Clara, saving herself, saving the truth from fire and silence. As the plane hummed and the baby settled against Amara's shoulder, Clara realized something she had never dared admit aloud. Family wasn't defined by the lies her father told or the blood he had tried to deny. It was defined by choice, by courage, by the way Amara had stood unflinching when the world demanded she bow. And in that quiet, high above the clouds, Clara smiled through her tears, because the maid her father had tried to erase, the sister he had buried in shame, had risen higher than he ever could, and she would never be forgotten.